Call this land use committee meeting to order June 4th at 9:30 a.m. First agenda item is a presentation by Kitsap County's Eric Baker, policy manager on transitory accommodations code. I think this is something, Fred, that you were interested in having a discussion about.
I, of course, love the sound of my own voice, but I don't want to waste your guys' time. How much do you know about what we've done in the Transitory Accommodations Code in unincorporated Kitsap?
A lot.
Okay, that's good. In which case, then I'll kind of start from the beginning. Obviously, what we had is we have a homelessness issue, and we have desperate need for a safe, secure location for people to be able to reside, get out of the weather, etc. Right now, we know that they're populating our parks, they're populating our vacant spaces. A lot of private commercial facilities or private commercial businesses are basically clearing out all their wooded areas that are having this problem. Public jurisdictions really don't have that ability. So the issue was real. So we created an emergency ordinance that allowed for nonprofit organizations and religious-based or faith-based organizations to put up temporary transitory accommodations. When I say transitory accommodations, there's a lot of different names for it. Sometimes they can be viewed as shelters, they can be viewed as encampments. Really the idea is for this to be a regulated, safe location for these folks who are occupying our parks and other public lands to come and as a transition out of homelessness, not a long-term solution. This is a place for them to be safe, that they can look for employment, they can look for additional housing, but they aren't in a position where they are the opposite of that, or that this is a long-term option for them. Obviously, Commissioner Garrido, I think, has been speaking with council about the idea for I won't use the word tiny home, because that's we'll call small shelter, small wooden structure version of this. The ordinance that you have before you actually allows for 3 different types of construction, one of which is wooden, another one is membrane tents, and also recreational vehicles are allowed in certain instances. So in creating bulk regulations, you always got to be careful not to catch a lot of dolphins in your tuna nets. You want to make sure you're only putting the process in place that you need for the scope and scale of what's being proposed. So with that, we created a series of different classifications of transitory accommodations, leading from the single-family residential, which is the lowest version. That is pretty much somebody who wants to who has someone at their church, some friend of theirs, etc., that needs a place to stay for 6 months at a time. I guess I'll back up. All of these, when I say temporary, these are meant for 6-month usage with a potential extension up to 6 additional months. And certain classifications I'll describe here in a moment can be made permanent after that 1-year period. Purpose for this is we want to make sure that these are able to work not just on the property, but for the neighborhood. So we don't want someone to come in and apply for a permanent use. I think as planners, we always think we can predict all futures, but sometimes you won't really know until they're on the ground. And these can have an effect on the outside neighborhood. So we want to make sure that they can come in, get up and running, see how it works, up to a year, and then they could be made permanent through a administrative conditional use permit process, but I'll go through that all in a moment. So going back to the various stages or various classifications, there's the small single-family residential. That, again, allows up to 2 tents, largely meant for people you know. There's no host agency that's required for this. The property owner can pretty much be the lead, but they do have to sign an affidavit that these individuals are connected with some form of case management. That can be either employment services, homelessness services, or something like that, but they need an affidavit saying that that's the case. Again, this is intended to be a transition, not a long-term solution. Case management is the key element to making this a transitional form of housing. Without case management, likely these folks are going to be there for a long time. They oftentimes have a lot of issues that need help working their way through. Sometimes it's substance abuse, sometimes it's mental health, employment, etc. So case management is key. But when we're talking about the single families, we're really talking about a very minimal impact and a lesser requirement for that. That's just the affidavit.
Can I just say that you say it's key, but it's actually required.
Yes.
So there's a difference.
Okay. Key and required.
So in other words, people need permission to have additional people living on their property.
Yes.
In their own. Do we
In a
have that?
temporary.
Do we have that? Do we care? Like if someone had 2 tents in their backyard, would anyone?
I would.
What if they were
I
in
mean,
front?
do we as a city have a provision against people doing that?
I think our code probably addresses it not very well, and we don't
Okay.
have an enforcement
Okay.
capacity if somebody
Yeah,
was doing
right.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Generally, with us, it is it's illegal by its omission from being allowed.
Yeah,
In place.
it has to be in the zoning table to be allowed.
Yeah, so basically we allow folks to live in single-family residences, guest houses, things like that. But if you don't fall into those classifications, you're generally prohibited. So we don't outright say you can't live in tents.
Do we have an RV provision on single-family lots? I don't remember if we've addressed that or not. Because obviously, if it's a licensed vehicle, you're allowed to park it and store it in your lot, except in McCormick Woods, where there's a covenant against that. But
Yeah, you can't be in the street.
you can't be in the street. But I don't even think we prohibit somebody from being in an RV
On their own lot.
on their own lot.
I remember that guy down into Sydney that had the septic that failed. He had to go to council to get special approval to hook up to temporary live in his RV. So we had to have
Well,
something.
yeah, we have. You're right. We do have we have something in there for like a temporary living quarters or something. I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, for construction purposes.
Yeah, like
Someone's
while construction is
building
going
their
on.
house, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. We have that allowance, but again, by omission, by the fact it's not covered other place, RVs are only allowed to be occupied under where it appears in the use table, etc. So with that, I'll move up in scope and scale. Then there's the small transient accommodation, which allows, I believe,
Up to 10.
from between 5 and 10 units to be placed. But with that comes a series of criteria and a series of standards. And I believe, Councilman Chang, you were interested in kind of what that process looks like. All of these require temporary permits. Temporary permits are our least cost permit we have. To that end, we are, to a degree, subsidizing these applications. DCD works on a cost recovery basis. This is probably one of those that once we see them coming in is not going to achieve that. The temporary permit doesn't bring in enough money. But with that, there's a series of processes that need to go on. There is, while it's a temporary permit, it's being reviewed as a Type 2 permit, which is largely what we do for administrative conditional use permits. So here's what the notification looks like. First of which, within 5 days of the application coming in, the applicant has to put a sign up on the property saying this is coming. 2, they need to hold a community meeting. Again, this is while the application is being processed, not afterwards, basically describing what they're going to do and how it's all going to work itself out. On top of that, the department circulates a notice of application to everybody within 800 feet of the property. So that's pretty much the one place that we are providing notification of the surrounding neighborhood. So all that happens during the application process. We take the various comments. Once all those are submitted, we have the ability to, again, attach conditions. As you go through the code, you'll note there's a whole series of conditions we have here regarding sanitary sewer, water, buffering, parking, security. Other things you'll see in here is a code of conduct. Again, going back to the idea that now that we're moving up into the small, large, safe park and indoor transitory accommodation classifications, you now need to have a host agency. You can't just be a single property owner. It has to be somebody who actually, some nonprofit group, some faith-based organization, someone who's going to be taking responsibility for what goes on this property. And along with all the site prep, there is the code of conduct, what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow. We don't have any requirements in here that they can't have substance abuse issues. That they can't. There's no requirement that these transitory accommodations have any kind of limitation on who can be in there. That's for the host agency to decide what level of control they truly can have, what level of effort they're going to have, and obviously probably the first ones that are going to be they really more high barrier, women and children, people without criminal records, etc. But there's nothing in our code that requires there to be some kind of barrier to getting into these facilities.
Do you know anyone that's doing this right now?
No one has utilized our code yet. We have 3 or 4 individuals. We have been battling the housing market. Property is worth a lot right about now, and there's a lot of things you can do that's a lot more valuable.
I'm just
Since
curious
2013, we haven't had
I'm
anybody
just
come in.
curious from an insurance perspective,
Okay.
how that property owner could possibly get this insured if you're, what's your level of disclosure if you're going to allow substance abuse and you got family with children next door? I'm just curious.
So I'm thinking of how they've done it in Seattle, like the Low Income Housing Institute, and it was on a lot next to a church. I don't know how they address the liability either, but have them all sign waivers.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
we've set this up in a way. It's really for the churches, the nonprofit organizations who oftentimes have. The Salvation Army had one on their property, so we're talking. They have to wrestle with their own liability,
Sure.
and with that's going to come who they're going to let stay there. And we have a need across the spectrum right now. Right now, we'd like to see someone be able to come in, be able to see a sample that people can see, okay, this is how it works in our setting. You can go over to Othello and see what it looks like in the very urbanized setting. But we'd like to see one come in. But we just wanted to create opportunities for other people to participate in helping with the homelessness crisis rather than just public agencies and some of the ones in downtown Bremer.
Well, the other thing is it's not inexpensive to set up a housing situation for
Right.
these folks. You're looking at utilities,
Oh, yeah,
extensions,
you go through
fences,
this list. It's like, oof.
paving, SDAP or site development activity permit requirements, grading permit requirements, perhaps. So
The
it's not
closest
a-
is what the Suquamish did, I guess. And they didn't need any permission. They did it on their own.
Yeah, they have their own process that
Okay.
is very different.
Right.
Also somewhat undocumented, but so moving through that, there's everything you need to do on the site. Again, with the small, you're talking about up to 10 units. Everything that Councilman Diener, sorry, I don't want to use your first name. That guy. It indicates it's true. There's a lot of upfront costs associated with this, and again, this is temporary. 6 months, probably a year, but there's a 6-month check-in. If this just is not working, I appreciate you put a lot of effort into this, but it's just not working for the neighborhood. It's creating too many issues. No, it's not going to be an extension.
Back to the cost, is there like just a rough estimate on what, is that a $10,000 number? Is that it could be a range.
So, one site that was recently considered was next to the Family Pancake House, and I think that was, by comparison, a relatively easy site to develop, and we were looking at approximately, I think it was 40,000 is what we were looking at for a sewer cut in across the road, paving, fencing, and associated utilities. So,
But that's different than putting tents in your
I'm talking about for
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about, no,
But you're
that's
talking
my
about
question.
permitting costs, aren't you? To the
Yeah.
city
Development
or the
costs.
county?
development costs for up to 10 units, right? Is that what
Are
you're
you talking about permitting
Both.
costs or what? I think permitting costs for you folks, we put down $38,000 when we were talking about that Family Pancake House site.
Just for permitting.
Well, that included connection fees for
Connection
water.
fees.
That was
And
development
And that's the
and
difference.
permitting.
Because if
Okay.
you're doing
Okay.
like tiny homes with a central kitchen, bathroom,
Yep.
and shower,
Yeah.
and that the property doesn't have a sewer service, it's going to go up.
Yeah.
If you're talking about throwing tents in your backyard and you're going to let them in to use your bathroom,
Sure, absolutely.
that's
Right.
the difference.
And again, this code allows that full spectrum. It doesn't have to be connected to sewer. Obviously, the optimum is it's located in an urban setting, close to case management services, has sewer, those types of things. But you're right, the prices go up at that point. That's why we, again, have elected to subsidize the permit cost, because we'd rather see the money spent on the ground producing or on case management services. Because case management services aren't free. They need to be paid for as well, and that's another ongoing cost. So it isn't just getting it on the ground. It is how are you going to pay for utilities, how are you going to pay for any security if you're going to have it, and how are you going to pay for case management services.
Well, and I think the other cost to the jurisdiction is there's ongoing monitoring from both the health department, and it calls for the director to be responsible for doing certain things or designating people for certain things. And so if the city were to do this, I'm not sure if the county health department would take the lead on this, But from a code enforcement standpoint, or if after 6 months it's not working and we have to go through a process where we're revoking their approval, attorney costs and things like that could be considerable.
That's all on that. So, and then pretty much as we start, the large is just it allows more units than the small. Then you have safe park, which is where people are allowed to stay in their vehicles. Now we're not talking about membrane, wood, or metal structures. We're talking about folks who are living in their car. The fairgrounds has one of these during inclement weather events. We allow people to stay on our fairgrounds, staying in their cars, etc. We have some limitations on those. Generally, they have to leave during the day, go out and do whatever they're doing, so that just isn't a car that's broken down on our fairgrounds. But then lastly, you have the indoor facilities, and that's the biggest. That allows up to 75 people, I believe, and is meant to be inside the structure. That obviously, if you're getting to 75 people, we're talking about old schools, old churches, old industrial buildings at certain times. Again, it has all the requirements of the small transitory accommodation. But again, with some additional conditions that come with it. At a certain level, you need to have centralized bathroom and kitchen facilities. So in the smaller versions, you have flexibility. So once that all kicks in. This is now allowed both in urban and rural areas. Originally, this code was only in urban areas, so we're finding a significant number of our large-scale churches who are showing interest. They're not located in the urban areas. They're located on Mulnix. They're located in portions of North Kitsap. It is not ideal to have them that far away from case management services, or away from transit, or some other way to move around. But until the housing market turns around and property becomes less valuable for a whole host of other uses that aren't this, it's been difficult to find a location in our urban areas, especially as Commissioner Greedo is very interested in citing one in South Kitsap, which pretty much in the urban areas is the city of Port Orchard or our unincorporated, the UGA, which is not particularly large. Or at least it doesn't have a lot of large tracts of land.
Yeah, it's not close to as many services.
So again, we have not seen one come in. We're really hoping we've had a lot of interest in it, but some of the issues have popped up with just property owner disinterest. We have one site that we're looking at right now where the church is significantly considering it, though they have their own process as to whether they're going to allow this on their property. That property is located in the UGA. So we're hoping to get one of these on the ground because there's a lot of fear and trepidation that comes along with these. Some of it could be real, but a lot of it's just generally perceived. There's just the idea when they think of this, they think of what they see in the Illahee Forest, just a bunch of tents and afterwards a bunch of garbage piles up and that kind of thing. This is not that. This is intended to be a monitored system where people are, that neighbors are allowed to participate early and often before the application is complete. So we know all the various things that they're concerned about. Obviously, some things that just aren't I don't want it here.
Right.
We can provide conditions to help provide additional compatibility. But again, notification within 800 feet, everybody, sign up on the property, community meeting. Probably with not just those 800 people within 800 feet, but a greater.
And this code is loosely modeled after other successful developments, so it follows the same rules of the game.
Would you describe it, or could it be described as being sort of a conditional use? I mean, our equivalent would be if we gave something conditional use.
Well, it sounds like this is more of an administrative conditional use where you can attach conditions to the permit and there is a notice of application versus just an administrative decision. So, if we were to go down this route, and we're working on our new zoning code right now, and one of the things that we could do is we could, I would say that yes, we could adopt something similar to this, maybe with a few tweaks, but I think generally this could be done. You would have in your zoning table two uses. One would be permanent transitory accommodations, which I would make a conditional use, and that's accommodations more than 1 year. And then I would say temporary would be permitted outright, subject to the provisions of this chapter where they have to get a type 1 or a type 2 permit, and we can attach conditions to it. One of the things I was going to ask though is, it seems to me that even establishment of a temporary use would meet the definition of development under our traffic impact fee code. And so how do you, have you somehow exempted this from like traffic review or SEPA review based on the number of housing units?
All of that, if it becomes a permanent use, kicks in.
Okay.
If it remains a temporary use, a lot of things are not, we don't hold them to all the various development standards. Obviously, if this is going to become a permanent use in the unincorporated area, the costs are going to go up because this is now a forever and always use. Mm-hmm. This isn't just something that we can pull at any time. So it has to be conditioned very carefully. Buffering gets stronger. The amenities have to get more robust to make it happen. That being said, when we don't want the costs to come up on someone who doesn't know if this is going to work in the first place, because that's on top of the indemnification risk. That's a lot of upfront cost that you have to put, with the idea being that you might not be able to have it more than 6 months because it didn't work out, or a year it didn't work out. So we went the easier route to allow a certain level of flexibility for the first year, up to the first year. Then if you want to make it permanent, that's when impact fees and some other things pop up. If you're going to call these housing units, I think there's probably a difference between if you're going to put in the the not tiny homes. At that point you have individual structures and you have people, but with tents you're going to have them coming and going. You don't know exactly how many you're going to have at any given time. I'm not quite certain how you would accurately grapple with the transportation impact of that, especially as a number of these folks do not have vehicles.
Yeah. Unless the housing is a vehicle or a RV.
Yeah, or that's the point.
I will say that Trish Tierney has reached out to me recently, and that they're having more and more commercial property owners that are not liking people that are sleeping in their cars in their parking lots, and she says there's definitely a need somewhere in our community
For a safe park?
For a safe lot.
How do you distinguish in the county code between an RV park and a transitory housing accommodation on a permanent basis?
Well, a recreational vehicle park actually doesn't appear in our code any longer. It's now basically a cottage housing. So, cottage housing allows for a wide variety of structure types. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we have RV park in our code any longer as an allowed use.
Okay. You guys have campgrounds or
no, private recreational facilities is what you're at that point, but that's not a full-time RV. That's the more tourism related. Come in, stay for the weekend, spend your money.
So it could be. It could be an RV.
Yeah, it definitely could be. But going back to how we distinguish between the two of them, is I think one has a series of very case management stipulations, etc. Mm-hmm. There's some clear criteria here that would not apply to an RV park, so that's why we have our own separate code element. There'd be some of the same types of things you'd be looking at. You'd be looking at screening. You'd be looking at required service provision. But there's a lot more to having an A-cup for a transitory accommodation. But right now, I'd like to see someone come in to test the sideboards of this. Because again, we've thought about this, we've drafted this carefully over time. Sometimes done is better than perfect. Done and having it on the board. That the way we have it so far has been largely supported by all the individuals. There isn't anything in here that has been viewed as a poison pill or substantial impediment. It's just finding a piece of land or finding a willing faith-based or nonprofit organization who can handle the indemnification aspects of this. But again, all we wanted to do is establish the vehicle to do so that we aren't establishing any arbitrary impediments to people helping with our homelessness crisis. And we didn't want to necessarily stipulate exactly how they had to do it, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to have to pay they're going to have to write the check. They're going to have to do the work. Public sector still has a role. Obviously, Commissioner Garrido is very interested in getting behind one of these. But it can't just be the public sector that is addressing this issue. We have a lot of community members who'd like to pitch in.
The other thing that limits certainly the larger developments in residential zones is the density. So with some of these, particularly if you want to take the cottage housing approach, there's a density requirement you got to meet, so you can't
For permanent.
for a permanent
Yeah.
development.
I was very interested in the public notice part because, and I appreciate that there has to be a sign on a lot, and there has to be a neighborhood meeting that I guess the proponent is conducting. And I was thinking it's too bad. I'm thinking of the lot behind Everybody's on Mile Hill.
That's one of
That never got to that point though. Nothing was posted on the property, and there was no neighborhood meeting, and then it just.
Whatever.
We had one that was before we even had our ordinance.
Okay.
There was
that?
one there.
Okay.
It subsequently got cleaned out right around the time we were adopting the ordinance. That's the site that we've looked at, and the property owner has kind of had a come here, go away, come here, go away type philosophy was. But you're right, that is a perfect location. If they were to move forward, they would have to do all of these things. And the neighborhood, who's of course very interested in that type of use in the property, would have multiple opportunities to talk about their concerns, some of which could be mitigated, and then some of which will just have to be addressed as I like the idea, I just don't want it by me. And that's, as we all know, largely unaddressable.
Great.
So I think, just from a staff perspective, if council wants to go this direction, I think, I see this consuming a lot of city resources and not being necessarily an easy thing to implement, but at the same time, the county hasn't had a single application, and so it may not be, just providing that opportunity may not actually be a huge deal. But if we got into an enforcement situation, or if we had an appeal of our decision to grant a permit because somebody in the neighborhood is unhappy about something, there are costs for that in terms of a hearing examiner, us paying a hearing examiner fee because we can't charge the full cost of the hearing examiner in an appeal. There would be some cost to this.
So we've had this in place since November of 2013. There was a lot of discussion leading up to that. We came back in 2018, or the county came back in 2018 and expanded this to allow for this in rural areas a little bit more. And we still haven't seen anything, although I think there's some interest by Fish Line up north.
Yes,
and
we have.
trying to get some.
We have a couple, three that are doing their due diligence right now, and
Right.
as I would expect them to. But again, this is not a silver bullet. It may not be perfect, but it is something that opens the door for an example and has enough safeguards in it to ensure that something that truly is not compatible with the neighborhood doesn't stay there forever. That it's both time limited, but also conduct limited. It's focused almost solely on compatibility.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you guys have any additional
Efforts should
questions.
be commended.
Sure. Would you consider moving your item 4 up next in the agenda, or you want to talk with Eric about that, or you want to talk about Eric after he leaves?
Eric is not involved in item number 4, so far as I'm aware, which is
What is number 4?
It's the Hanley Construction Comp Plan Amendment and Site-Specific Request.
I could only operate off second-hand knowledge, which, as we all know, is perilous.
Okay. Just had you here in the room.
I can share with you what's of public record on that, although I will recuse myself.
So you may not speak about me longer.
Thank you,
That's a
Eric.
standing agenda item.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. But would we like to move item 3 to number 2 since we've got interest?
Well, I think we can postpone item 2 because Lynn's been on vacation. I wanted to have prepared issues and things, so let's just move
I guess
this
before we
on.
move to the next item, though, in terms of item number 1,
Okay.
I mean, this is obviously a presentation and discussion. Is there further action, or do you want to bring this to the full council for discussion, or or is there a next step from?
Do we want to talk more about it at the next land use committee meeting, or Fred? What are your thoughts?
I've been curious, for example, and we've had a lot of issues with this, but for example, like county-owned property, which is community facilities, would they be permitted to have one of these small or large transitory accommodations under our current code.
No,
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a little bit of wiggle room to create something as a conditional use, but that requires a full trip to the hearing examiner and a public hearing, so there's a high upfront cost. And
But
there's a
who would
significant-
pay for? Would we?
The applicant would pay for
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's
We cannot pay for it. The city cannot.
Well,
pay
no.
for it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the applicant would pay
yeah.
for
So
that.
we found a way in the commercial zone to provide an avenue to creating. We looked at the tiny house cluster behind the Pancake House, and I forget, we used an SIC code, which is the industrial classification book that we have from 1987, that the federal government created, and we found something that includes like mental health care in conjunction with housing, and we found a use that would, per our zoning table, be allowed in as a conditional use. So we found a way to make that possible, but we wouldn't be able to allow it on a community facility lot or on a residential lot. It has to be a commercial property. That's my recollection off the top of my head anyway.
One comment that I would have is, we have a model document now that, and I appreciate Eric's comment that while it's not perfect, it's done.
Yeah, I
Right.
see that too. Yeah, it's something.
Again, I don't know what type of resources it would take to fold something like this in. Because this is a model. I mean, again, I know how busy we are on all these other issues. If we did have an applicant come forward, maybe it could be addressed at that time, because maybe it wouldn't take that long to basically mirror something like this. But again, I am reflecting on the fact that this has been in place for 5 years and there's been nobody interested in pursuing it. So at what point are you,
I think if we're going to consider it, I think we need to get out in front of it and not wait for the application. If we're gonna, I think we do or we don't.
Lack of code may be preventing consideration.
Yeah.
okay.
But and we gotta, if we're gonna do it, sorry to get over here in the corner.
I see you.
You can come to the table if you want.
Why not?
You are the mayor.
I showed up late though. What are we gonna not do? I mean, we've got a pretty robust work plan right now. If we think this is a priority, what is it we're gonna prioritize over what's in the current work plan and not get to?
I think that was my point. Is like how much? What are the resources we're looking at, both financially, time, attorneys, the whole deal to get this across the finish line and be able to quantify that, so we could perhaps answer that question you just posed. Because I think you're right on.
I think there's two issues. Number one, we're working on updating our zoning code, and would we adopt this before we adopt our zoning code, or as part of the zoning code, or after the zoning code? And I think by adopting something like this new as part of the zoning code, you're opening the opportunity that somebody would appeal the entire ordinance versus having finality on this as an independent action of the city council. So
sounds like a good recommendation to me. Is that's independent of.
independent and subsequent to, or if we put it in the code now, it's going to delay our zoning code a little bit, but at least it's not something new that we're introducing. It's just it's a formatting amendment rather than a substantive amendment to the code.
A couple things. I would like the independent and subsequent to approach, because I think we've got so much on our plate and so much of it is important to the future of Port Orchard. But also that the county is, I think, getting some traction on this project they're looking at. The church is currently entertaining whether they want to move forward with that. They already have similar, I think, men's counseling services on site, so it's not like they're entirely unaware of what's involved with this kind of a program. And the county should have a decision on that pretty quickly. So
The beauty of that is if they move forward, it gives us a chance to see how
Yeah.
well it was implemented
Working
versus us taking their code, implementing it, and us figuring out what's the challenges are.
and it provides some relief to circumstances in our area.
Yeah.
So I see this as a possible mid-year addition in the 2019 work plan once we've gotten other zoning code things done.
Okay.
That makes sense to me.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I'd prefer it be done sooner than later, but at least that's on the calendar. I guess I just don't understand why we would not let the county do something on their own property just because it's a community facility. And that's more of a philosophical discussion because, I'm thinking of their properties around the jail, which are unused and which are ugly.
In July, you're going to get a reason
Okay.
why the
Okay.
county isn't moving forward because they're moving forward with
Okay.
a new.
The staging area or something.
No, it's going to be either parking or a new building.
Oh, okay.
They're building. We're getting the first public look at the
Law Justice Center.
the Law and Justice Center. Yeah, and that's moving forward.
Okay.
All right, do we want to move item 3 up?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, so item 3.
Or, I guess two's postponed.
Choose table.
Two's going to be postponed.
Right, that's right.
And I don't see anything on the agenda that you need me.
Step out. I'll be right back.
Okay.
You don't want to be here for the
think I should-
trees?
No, I'm gonna-
Do you want to be here for the trees?
I'll surprise you.
Significant trees? No.
Public art?
That's a event plan.
What about public art on our city-owned signal boxes?
They do that.
You're okay if somebody paints our boxes?
They do that in Seattle.
Yes.
Wraps actually.
It's what? PSE? That's,
No, our traffic signals that we own.
Right, but they're still. Yeah, I don't care.
Okay.
Okay, so number 3.
Small self-facilities ordinance.
All right. So you all received a
Let me pass out.
marked up copy of what are you passing out here?
That's the.
Oh yeah, we also got a written letter on Friday from Kim Allen, who's here today. She had provided a marked up version of our draft ordinance that we presented at the last council work study meeting, and we needed a little bit more time to consider the comments that had been submitted. And so I think more than anything, I want to walk through those comments, and perhaps I don't know if there are additional comments that. And I'm not sure who the other gentleman is here.
This is Bill Powell. He's
Oh yeah, okay, Bill. Yeah, we've met before. So no, it was thought that maybe T-Mobile and AT&T would show up, and so I don't know if they would have additional comments to this or not. But I think we can at least work through the comments that we've received and discuss those. So the first I think big issue, and most of the issues I think really boil down to this chapter 050, which are the standards for the facilities. What we're being told is that we were proposing to allow that replacement poles or extensions on existing poles could go up to 6 feet higher than the height of the existing pole. And it seems to me that the industry is seeking 15 feet. I think I've seen that in the legislation that's been discussed in Olympia but not yet adopted, is that 15 feet is kind of the industry standard there. And if you want to come up and we have...
if I could, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and actually what the industry is asking for, at the bottom line, the industry wouldn't want any height extensions on the poles if we didn't have to. The pole owners, Puget Sound Energy here, requires that we go above the power lines with our attachments. And so we have to extend the pole by the amount that they need for safety clearances plus the height of our antennas. So that's why we are proposing up to 15 feet, but only the minimum necessary to achieve the safety standards of the pole owner. So 15.
Could it state that then? Up to 15 feet with.
And I think that's what I've proposed in.
Maximum.
So did most of these poles, just the way they were constructed, the depth of which they were put in their ground, can they accommodate a 15-foot height extension?
Many can't. What we're finding is they have top rot, they're old, they can't accommodate a pole extender being clamped down to the top. And so Puget Sound Energy will require the wireless carriers to replace the pole at a taller height. And sometimes the pole owner has decided that they would like a little more room in the supply space for themselves too. So will replace. That's where the up to 15 feet comes. The pole owner requires us to put a pole in that's X high, and we don't have any say over that and any control over that. So we're happy to provide the certification to the city that this is the pole owner's requirement. They're requiring us to replace this pole with a pole that is X feet tall. But that is so that's why we're proposing that, as opposed to a hard stop at 6 feet, which would take a lot of the existing poles off the table for small cell attachments.
So from a policy standpoint, I think that obviously we have an interest in improving cell phone service in Port Orchard, and I think we all know that there are areas of the city that don't have great service. But there's obviously a variety of options for doing that, and this is just one of those options. And I'm not really sure. I haven't gotten a sense from council how in favor. I think I've heard from a couple council members that they really, have a preference not to have a whole lot of this stuff in the right of way versus others who maybe want to have just let's roll out 5G technology and have the best service possible in the city. And
So let's say we somewhere on Bethel. I'm just grabbing. We've got a corridor study underway. Two of these get put on poles on Bethel with a new pole with, this equipment on top of it. Now we've got an undergrounding ordinance. The right of way gets widened. The utilities get underground. Are you responsible then as an industry to then find some other location for that because the pole's gone?
Yes, generally what we do, we have a franchise agreement with the city to use the right of way, to enter the right of way. I know Nick's proposing something a little different here with a permit as opposed to a franchise agreement, but generally most cities require a franchise agreement.
well, it's both. It's a franchise agreement, and then you permit the individual installation.
Okay.
So that'd be one of my concerns is we got to remove that pole, but we have something that we can't get rid of.
Oh no, we would, as a term of that agreement, agree to remove when you underground. And generally, what we would look to do is to do a light standard small cell instead, because generally streetlights remain after all of the undergrounding projects. So we would, and sometimes we can provide streetlights in areas that don't have them when they underground as well, because that would be at our cost.
Where do you think the industry will start? I mean, is this most needed in urban areas? We're just, between King County, Pierce County, Kitsap County. I mean, when all this stuff gets going, where do you think, where's the biggest need right now?
Well, there are a couple of different deployments or different strategies. One is in urban areas where you have a lot of people. The other use that we have for them, and I know that in Port Orchard you definitely have this, is there are coverage gaps. Because of terrain, because of water. Water makes RF signals do very weird things. So they've been challenging to cover. Residential areas, large tract residential areas, are a place where we haven't been able to site cell towers historically. And so those are difficult to cover. And now everyone's using their phones up the driveway, inside the house, down into the family room. So we need to get into those areas. And so it can actually provide coverage in areas like Port Orchard,
Right.
As opposed to just expanding the capacity
I'm just
for
wondering
the
from a
data use.
return on investment perspective that you're investing tons of money when you don't have the users to offset that cost.
Well, if we're selected locations, we will see a return on the investment. And the RF engineers use the customer complaint data, they use the drive test data, they're very scientific on how they select where these facilities need to go.
The number of devices worldwide will conservatively surpass 20 billion by the year 2020.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, it's the Internet of Things too.
Yeah.
We've got someone was telling me they have two children who are diabetic, and the kids have pumps that are hooked up to an alarm that goes off on their mom's wristwatch if either one of them their blood sugar fluctuates. She said she hasn't had a good night's sleep since the kids were diagnosed. But I mean, those types of devices are on the wireless network more than they ever were before.
Yeah.
So, but you would be, as a rollout, you would be looking at sort of the commercial corridors where those gaps exist. But this is also to supplement 5G, right?
Well, 5G will be deployed in this fashion in the small cell model as opposed to towers. So when 5G becomes commercially available, it will utilize the existing infrastructure. Right now, we're looking to shore up our 4G network and add coverage where we don't have coverage, and add capacity where we have too many users that are stressing the system.
I think the concern that I would anticipate that some council members would have would be the appearance of the poles. Are there examples, or are they anticipated to be?
Well, there's one picture that I've attached here. This is not typical. I don't have anything with Google.
For the aesthetics.
Yeah, I can email. Generally, Verizon's deployment are two 2-foot panel antennas that are at the top of the pole, and then there's a box further down on the pole that is
Is that what we see here? This right here is that.
These are actually, this is addresses a different issue that you've got here. These are 8 radio antenna combos. And so you have proposed here a 4 antenna limit. And so a design like this would be impossible if you
Yeah,
limit
and we're
the number.
willing to, I mean, that's not a big deal to increase.
But that's
that.
why I included this picture. You
I
know,
see.
the typical. Do you have anything on that? Any pictures or anything that you need?
I can throw someone a jump drive.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
That'd be great.
So I think, when I look at this issue, I think this 6-foot limit, if we keep it, it has the effect of essentially not having small cell antennas on wooden poles because PSE isn't going to allow it. And so if your goal is to direct them to light standards and to traffic signals, then a 6-foot standard effectively does that. But if you're looking for flexibility, a 15-foot standard is going to allow the full use of existing poles. My other question though was, do you guys attach to both transmission and service poles, or is it?
Yeah, and if PSE, if it's a combo pole, transmission and distribution, they allow us to go in between the 2 sets of lines, so
Okay.
we don't have to extend those giant poles taller.
That's what I was wondering.
Because we reach a point where over about 40, 45 feet, we start to lose antenna effectiveness. They need to be closer down. They're not very high power. They don't go very far, but they carry a lot of data. And so it's not to our advantage to go tall. And so PSE will let us go in between those 2 sets of lines.
So, just adding to Nick's question, I don't know if I completely answered it. So, my street, one side of the street is the power poles, and then you've got distribution poles that are the drops going
Right.
across the street. Are you only attaching to the distribution poles? Or are you going to attach to those drop poles that?
Probably not to the drop poles. We would use the distribution poles probably.
And I wanted to. We have one example, and I don't know.
Yes, you do.
I think this is
It is Verizon,
Is that Verizon?
the one that's down at the ferry dock.
Yeah. So this is one that I've driven by, and I assume this happened when it was in the county because I think it's been there for a while.
Well, actually, it's WashDOT property.
That's
Oh,
actually,
so
that's
this is
actually
not the ferry
that's Bethel. That's
Oh, that's Bethel?
That's
Oh.
the veterinary hospital. Yeah.
Okay,
And
and
it's-
then
That's
that
T-Mobile then.
that's T-Mobile's. That's not ours.
So what I see this as an example
panel's
of
pretty
exactly
big.
what we don't want. Although I don't think this is a small cell. This is just a
cell tower.
regular cell tower.
Those antennas look big, and generally a small cell antenna would be 2-foot panel antennas that are about 6 inches off the pole, because you can't attach anything directly to the pole.
Yeah.
And we would not. That's a macro.
They should put a vending machine there.
Yeah. So I think, and this is transmission and distribution,
Right.
as well. And so that's obviously a very tall
That's
pole, and
lot of
adding 15 feet to that would be.
Yeah, and we would, if we were going to attach small cell antennas, we would attach two 2-foot panel antennas to the space between the 2 sets of lines, the 2 top
Go up
sets of
40
lines, and then there'd be a conduit run down to a box that's about 12 inches. 12
How do we
inches.
prevent this? That's what I want.
Those are macros.
Well, but even how would we prevent small cell from looking like this?
Well, the state definition limits.
And in particular, all those that control all needs to be in a nice looking box in the ground or underground.
Well, and you can require that the equipment be in an enclosure. Certainly the Verizon design has it in an enclosure. The radios, it's much smaller than that because small cells the equipment is very small. We don't need any of the computer basebands and things like that because each of the small cell nodes goes back to one of the macro sites or a hub. So that's where all of the big equipment is kept.
So you're seeing people where they're vaulting them and putting them underground?
No, we have not been able to find a vaulting solution in the Pacific Northwest that works for the radios. They corrode because we have not. No one has been able to offer us a moisture-proof vault, and the radios being sensitive equipment, we've had a lot of trouble with that. So we would attach them to the pole in an enclosure, painted to match the color of the pole to minimize the visual of it. And Bill's going to get a picture of it.
Yeah, it's taking me a little bit longer than I thought.
And you said that there's also street furniture that you can use to hide that as well.
We can.
Yeah.
What type of furniture would it be?
They've got they got some interesting solutions. One are the wrapped boxes, but they also have some garbage cans that are functionally garbage cans, but also have the equipment in the base. If we do light standards, we can put the equipment in the base. of it.
I mean, I preferred in a not mounted on the pole, even in a box on the pole. At least if it's on the ground, doing the things that you're describing are much more appealing than a cabinet mounted 3 or 4 feet off.
Because most jurisdictions don't want us to put more stuff in the right of way. In terms
Maybe
of public
I'm-
works
maybe I'm
folks and the
off base.
planning.
Well, if it's functional, it's I agree.
What's that?
If
Maybe
it's
mark it to the
functional,
left.
like a trash can or something.
I mean, I think
Maybe.
you probably would have the same concerns about having
Yeah.
more things on the ground in the right
Versus
of way.
versus on the pole. Okay.
Yeah. And
Maybe
from
I'm
a
off
from a
base.
technical standpoint, it's not the most because the run between the radios and the
I
antennas.
guess how big is this? Because what I saw there was
That's huge. No,
Huge.
no,
I mean,
we're talking about like 18 inches, 18 inches.
I'd like your hands smaller.
I know we're working on it. But the radios, especially in a place like Port Orchard, need to be fairly. We have the little radios like that, but that's for really dense Seattle urban areas. They don't go very far at all. You want to be able to minimize the number of poles you're using. And so we would use radios that are 18 inches by 9 by, they're about that big. I can get you a spec sheet on it.
Not much bigger in diameter than
That'd
the
be
pole.
great if you could email us those things.
Yeah.
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 And if the
staff.
pole's 12 inches and it's 3 inches a side bigger than the pole, I
Is
guess
that our
that's
one
not
small
huge.
size?
But what we saw there was
I've got
gross.
some other things.
So-
I think it might have been what a small scale.
We've hijacked your meeting.
No, that's okay.
Good.
Let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, because we would have that freezer.
I think there probably is more discussion needed about pole mounted versus ground mounted.
For the equipment. Yeah, the antennas have to be on the pole.
Well, I think that's in the next section here. But in terms of the height extensions, I mean, really, it's do we want these things on poles or do we want them? And as part of our land use code update, we are creating small cell as a permitted use, and building mounted small cell specifically. We're going to make it much easier to mount it to the roof of a building or to the side of a building, provided that
Good.
it's screened. And so, if we provide an easier path for doing this not in the right of way, is that preferable to having these on?
No, well, because the building mounted, you lose signal for the part that's facing the face of the building, so you don't
Okay.
get a 360. And getting the thing that's good about the right of way is that you have power and fiber easily accessible there. To run it to a private property doesn't pencil out, and the owners generally there's not enough because it's such a small attachment. There's not enough in it to make them want to lease to you as well.
Okay.
So that's why the right of way is really is the optimal place.
Okay, so this is a decision. I mean, does the land use committee feel comfortable making a recommendation on this, or are you comfortable with up to 15 feet as is described?
The minimum necessary is what we're asking for.
Yeah, I'm
15
okay.
feet or the minimum necessary?
I'm okay with that.
Up to 15 feet.
Yeah.
Or the minimum
The minimum
necessary.
necessary up to 15 feet.
Okay. So then the equipment concealing, and Kim, you had written that our language was vague. I think it's kind of still vague, and so I think I'm okay with vague language, but I think it needs to be accompanied by pictures. And I think if you have pictures of yes, this is acceptable, and no, this is not acceptable, that would really help clarify the vague text.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if you guys can provide the type of concealment that you would be proposing, and show us something that's palatable, and then I can use that example from Bethel as saying that this is an example of what's not okay.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful if I can get 2 to 3 of good and 2 to 3 of not good.
Okay. Okay. We can.
Can I ask you, I mean, your objection to the one at Bethel, is it the height, the bulk, or what are the specifics of
I think it's both. I think
It's
it's
industrial in nature looking.
Yeah, first of all, it's not concealed. It's not integrated with the pole. It's bigger than the pole in terms of the equipment that's mounted to the pole, and the antennas are also on a transmission line at a very high height above transmission rather than in between transmission and distribution.
So if we could put the antennas in between, shroud the equipment, these
Yeah.
would-
Yeah, and I can give you.
And it's not painted to match.
Right. And I'll send you pictures of good small cells that,
Yeah.
that you will like.
I mean, this isn't also. This isn't like
That's
this is
a
a
macro.
macro site.
Right.
It's big.
So can I just do a time check? It's almost 10:30, and we've got some other items. And you guys, I think we're going to send some illustrations, which will help. Do we? Nick, do you want to punt this, or do you want to keep going?
Let me get through a couple of other items here, just so you know, because I know your time is valuable. Concerning flush mounting, I think, you know, we want these things mounted as flush to the pole as possible, realizing that there's going to be a gap. And I think if we can change the language to say that as close to flush as possible versus flush,
That's
does
fine.
that work for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
and still, and you do recognize the electrical code requirements and pole owners requirements up
Sure.
top, which is great. But by defining it as being nailed to the pole, which is not possible.
Yeah.
So I think we're good.
So,
with your
and I think we
retweak.
still want to cap on the number of antennas on a pole, but we would go to 8 if 8's the number that you need. And we would rather cap the cubic volume at 12 cubic feet. So if they are smaller and you have 8 of them, that's fine.
If you want to see, we don't have a problem with you capping the volume. It was just when you're capping at 4, you may not get 5G.
Gotcha.
And so I don't
the
know if
number
there's a
or-
magic number. I think that you would not get pushback at 8.
Okay.
Would be my guess.
If you want to check on that.
Why cap it at all, though? I mean, a bunch,
That's
a
what I
bunch
was
of little
thinking.
ones more
Yeah.
objectionable.
Well,
than
would you
four
have multiple carriers trying to locate on the same pole?
No, that's not technically feasible right now.
Okay.
So-
I mean,
Is that the
Because of
concern,
the
though, is that you have multiple
Radio
carriers?
band interference.
yeah, I guess.
Co-location.
If you put the volume there, you can only get so much,
Right.
and however many you can squeeze in that so,
So
much.
we want to go no cap? Are you guys
I'm probably
comfortable?
okay with that.
12 cubic feet,
Yeah, the volume I think is
3 by 4.
optimally what we would like.
Okay.
3 by 4 is pretty big.
For ground mounted, so what I've described here, so this isn't saying it has to be in a vault. It says it can be in a vault, concealed in the base of a pole, or concealed in street furniture. And so I've added the furniture per your request.
Okay. And then but we have the option to mount to the pole too.
Let's see here.
Oh, this is just for all ground
This is
mounted.
ground mounted
Okay.
equipment.
Okay.
Yeah. Replacement poles. That was just a. I don't know where that comment came from. So 30, you would apply for potentially up to 30 small cell antennas at a time
Right.
under one franchise agreement, and then you could apply for 30 more. It's just the size of the batch that we're dealing with.
Well, yeah, in terms of the small cell permits, the construct that other cities are using is a small cell or a franchise to use the right of way citywide. Then we come in for small cell permits, which
Sure.
are the actual designs and locations and that sort of thing, in batches of up to 30.
Okay.
And
Sure. Okay, and I think on all of your other comments, in terms of the engineering, I think we're comfortable with it. We want to talk to PSC about it, but that should be fine. The SEPA reference was only because if something is in water, which I don't think you're going to put a small cell antenna, it would be subject to SEPA. So
Yeah.
we're just we're leaving it there,
Abundance
knowing
of
that
caution.
99.9% of the time it's exempt. And then we'll give you a year to pick up the permit after issuance. And I think those are the main decision points. I think renewing this as a batch as part of the franchise renewal is possible, rather than having to do a renewal on each permit.
that would be great. Yeah, if it could be the renewal of the franchise, that we have a system in place to track that. But
Sure. And then 90 days isn't an issue on notice.
Okay.
And we're still talking to the attorney about the liability, but I think self-insuring probably, well, actually, this is the pollution one. I think there's something about
Self-insure.
allowing you to self-insure
Right.
that should be doable.
with the approval of the city.
So I can send you a revised draft hopefully soon, and
And I'll
we can
send
work
you
through
lots of
this.
pictures.
Yes, please do.
Thank
That'd
you
be great.
very much.
I looked around.
Have
I'm sure it's in some folder in my computer.
They're so concealed, you can't find them.
That's right. They're so small.
So do we want to do a speed round on these remaining issues? I think we can go pretty fast.
Sure.
Do it.
What's the next one?
The letter on the
Okay,
Hanley.
so let me tell you about what's going on there.
It's
So
it's Henley's. Or
I thought it was
Hanley's.
Hanley
Hanley's.
Hanley Roofing.
Yeah, but they're not named in the letter. It's just on the agenda. It was wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so they applied for a site-specific amendment to go from a combination of medium residential and high residential to commercial. They indicated in their application not any sort of use that they call themselves, at least according to the county's use table, but that they believed that they could become a non-conforming use in a commercial zone. We indicated to the applicant's rep, Bill Palmer, that we were going to be doing a use determination on this. And the use determination is not final, but in all likelihood what you're going to find, again, using a variety of common sense approaches in the industry classification system that you mentioned earlier today, that they are a construction outfit and are more appropriate to an industrial zone. I don't think that they're going to appeal that. If they do, it'll go to the hearing examiner.
Which is all consistent with our
It's
letter.
all consistent with our letter. The next thing that the county will probably do is tackle the grandfathering claim that they're likely to make in terms of the legal nonconformity that somebody could pursue. As you probably are aware, you can only be considered legally nonconforming or legally grandfathered if you were permitted to begin with, and the county can't find evidence of any permit activity. And if you look at the Google Maps or the parcel maps over the years, you can see that they've expanded, so that even if they could argue or demonstrate some legal standing, they couldn't have expanded that. And so that's the county's concerns. All that is of public record. And I'd like to be recused from any direction on this final letter, and I'd like you to note that there was a recusal in the final paragraph of that.
So I was planning to bring this to council for, council consent at the next meeting. I mean, do either of you have any comments on this in terms of its
Where
form?
is this? Is this on Bethel?
It's off of Miles Hill, kind of near.
By the fire station, Fircrest Drive.
Okay.
Right next to the fire station.
Yeah.
It's their construction yard, not their office.
Yep,
So yeah, this is the draft that I would be sending on your behalf if you all agreed to send this on Tuesday, a week from Tuesday.
I think it's a
And
good
they
letter.
got on the county's radar by demoing a house and not getting a grading permit, and there was some runoff concerns from the site. And we let them know that they were back on our radar in terms of code compliance, and they have rapidly developed that site to make it look better, razor wired it. So all of this is sort of at the owner's expense.
All right, the
So
significant.
Tuesday night you're going to bring that for the
Yes.
full council too.
And do we want it on the agenda or just as a discussion item at the end?
Consent agenda?
Sure.
Just throw it in the consent
okay
agenda.
Well, then there would be
consent.
no discussion if it was on the consent agenda.
Right, do we need,
I'll put it on the consent, and if somebody wants to pull it off, they
There
can.
you go.
yeah,
Okay.
you're just approving the format of approval of
It seemed to
the
reflect my recollection of what we
Although you
talked
can't
about, so.
recuse yourself from the consent agenda. So if you want to recuse, it needs to be business.
yeah,
I'd like to recuse myself.
Okay,
Right, because
business
there's
items.
a potential that this will be appealed.
yes. Okay.
Okay.
Significant trees is probably the meatiest of these. Do we want to?
It's pretty straightforward, I think. Essentially, our existing significant tree code has a huge loophole because for whatever reason they inserted their significant tree ordinance into the landscape code. The landscape code only applies to new development, yet the significant tree code appears to be written to apply to all significant trees, but because of where it was put in the code, it doesn't. It kind of reminds me of the Ingley billboard case where we had a billboard chapter and a different title of our code, and and then we had the separate sign code, and they were, they didn't quite align the way that they should. So as part of our new code update, we're proposing to change significant trees a little bit so that it would apply to all existing significant trees, meaning if you cut a significant tree, you have to replace it at the ratios prescribed. Right now, we define significant tree as anything 36 inches or larger being replaced at a 3-to-1 ratio. What we're proposing is that actually 18 inches or larger is really significant, but that we have a table that has a different replacement ratio depending on how big of a tree you remove. And you can either provide a significant tree retention plan as part of your development application, or if you're just looking to remove the tree, you can come get approval from the city and replace it. And we want them to make sure that they survive, the replacement trees survive for 5 years. I don't think we're going to be real hard on enforcement on this. If we can get 90% compliance with significant trees with minimal enforcement costs, that would be,
I guess my only concern is Sean's got a tree in his backyard, and he thinks it's dangerous. I mean, you walk back there.
Yep.
I hate,
if so,
but I'd hate for Sean to have to hire a professional arborist to say, I mean, common
We do that
common
now.
sense.
yeah, I mean,
Should be able to prevail in this.
So,
Yeah, but I'll just be the devil's advocate. People are taking down trees for all kinds of reasons, and those trees are healthy and fine, and that they're arguing they're danger trees or.
And there is a movement to increase canopy in areas
Yes.
like, yeah.
Having had a tree come down on my house, I think anything
Yeah,
Well, your trees look
that's
unhealthy.
that are large that can reach your house is dangerous, in my opinion. I mean,
was that a healthy tree? Otherwise,
appeared to be. It was rotten in the middle, split in half. $30,000 later.
yeah.
yeah, the problem too is a lot of times you've got water table issues that you're unaware of. The tree's healthy, but then in these big water events, the root balls start to float, winds come, and boom, they're gone. So it doesn't have to be a healthy tree that falls
I
over.
hear both sides of it, but I've
Yeah.
had an experience where I'm going. My wife wouldn't have let me touch that tree,
yeah.
until it split in half and
What
came
are you
down the
taking
house.
How does this impact a tree that the wrong tree was planted or whatever? Just there's a wrong tree, and now your roots are getting into your foundation or something. So no, this tree needs to come down. 'cause it's
So I
damaged
think
your
that
house.
the definition of, and we did note that sometimes trees cause foundation damage, and so I think it would not meet the definition of significant tree if it's causing danger to your, damage to your house.
So then you would not need to replace.
You would not need. Well, actually, the discussion. Sorry, I'm trying to remember back to Thursday. You would be able to remove it, but you would have to replace it at ratios, but with the appropriate species and maybe further away from your foundation. So
I'm okay with it as long as I can make a common sense judgment that this tree is dangerous to my family, and I have to replace a tree that's 2 inches in caliper in my yard somewhere.
But why 3? Why would you have to go 3 or more?
Well, we can change the ratios. I mean, if it's an 18-inch tree, maybe it's 1-to-1 versus a 36-inch tree that's 3-to-1 because of the amount of canopy that's provided by.
Depending on what kind of tree
3
you're
is
planting, in 10
current,
years
right?
you could have an
3 is
18-inch
current.
tree.
A lot of cities go 6. And so that was, in talking to, we were talking to Makers Architecture about this, and they said, they see anywhere from 3 to 6 on the 36-inch replacement ratio. And so I started with the higher one, but it can be any number. We're going to bring this to the Planning Commission probably in July just to introduce it, and then August as part of our hearing on the zoning code updates.
Okay.
So,
So how do you go after the survivability guarantees without actually requiring a bond of some sort?
we thought about that a lot, and I think, bond tracking is a fairly staff-intensive process. I think that every replanted tree is not going to survive, and I don't know that it's worth the amount of money it would take to enforce this to actually monitor a bond. I think it would be better to have a 5-year requirement. If somebody submits an application a few years down the road and we go out there and we said, hey, there used to be some replacement trees here, what happened to them? We can enforce it then. But I don't know that we want to take a real proactive role in this just because we don't have the resources to do so.
Right. I see it being something that's gamed. People not wanting to put in trees, but having to put in trees, and then they just won't take care of them and they'll go.
Well, and if it's part of a development, they have to have a maintenance bond as part of their landscape installation.
Right.
So those guys are going to be captured in the bonding,
Right.
but for the individual homeowner that takes down a significant tree, they we're not going to make them put a cash set aside.
So what I'm hearing is 1-to-1 on an 18 and 3-to-1 on a 36.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
That's what I heard from Nick.
Yeah, I don't know though. I mean, just think about that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at I have a little area in my front yard. They planted a tree. It's a cedar tree. They should have never planted that tree. I've noticed this over the last 10 years. It's getting outrageous. At some point, it's going to be a problem. I don't have that big of an area, so now I got to plant maybe three trees. I don't have room to plant 3 trees.
But how big is the diameter of the trunk?
Right now, it's probably 15.
So it's not even a significant tree yet.
No, it's not. But what if it was? What if
Yeah.
if this thing was 36 right now?
Well, we allow them to be planted off-site. So if you find a place to
Also
plant
in
it
the city.
in the city, within proximity, we also would allow, with the Public Works Director's permission, to plant a tree in a park or on public property.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in your.
Yeah, so it's really to maintain canopy in the
Okay,
city.
okay.
So, anyway, so this is just the first draft of this. I wanted to get some initial feedback. I think the big loophole right now, though, is that people come in and cut down their trees before they apply for development, so that they don't have to comply with our tree retention ordinance. So, it's definitely being gamed today, and so it's a weird thing where we sit in a meeting and we say, yeah, you need to submit a tree retention plan because it's required as part of your development, and we sort of, we're just silent on the fact that if you hadn't applied for development, you could have cut all these trees down. And, I don't think that's the intent, but that's how the code reads.
That's not the intent.
I'm just more concerned about the existing home and the dangerous tree, and the process isn't too onerous.
Is this an issue? I mean, we're really seeing this being an issue. Do we need what's driving this?
What he just said, that it's in the wrong place in our code, and I think it's more of a problem with the vacant lot that hasn't been developed yet, and our code doesn't apply to that. And so what happens is, so if you submit a development application, now you're required to replace trees. But if you went in and clear cut the lot ahead of your development application, you don't have any requirements at all. So so that's more the issue. It's not the tree, that cedar tree in your lot, although that would capture this, that you should. What I don't want a situation is your neighbor doesn't like you, and they prevent you from removing a tree that you feel is dangerous, and you shouldn't have to go through an expensive process to determine it's healthy or not healthy. If you feel it's not safe and it's damaging your driveway or your foundation, you ought to be able to make that judgment, and maybe you should have to plant it. Let's just saying is. If it's 18 inches, you'd have to replace one.
Yeah.
And if
But
it's
we
36,
should, we
sick,
should
you
check
can-
that judgment, because how are you able to determine that it's not a significant tree? Or that it's...
the size is going to
Exactly.
determine its significance.
Well, but if it's
Right,
diseased, it's
but-
not a significant tree. You just have to have somebody tell you
Yeah.
that it
You're,
is.
They
you're
don't
wanting
have
to
to
use
replace it
common
at all.
sense to take down a tree, but should that be checked? What is
I
your
can tell you.
judgment
I
that-
can tell you that the 36-inch tree in my backyard, an arborist would have said it was fine.
How much does an arborist? What is the fee
Yes,
for
it
an
was
arborist?
rotten in the
then?
middle.
I'd guess an arborist charges you $200 or $300 to
Okay,
come out. And,
I don't think that's significant.
So if it's rotten, then do you have to replace it?
no, it's not a
No,
significant
that's-
tree.
Only significant tree. Interesting. Okay.
The other thing I think that maybe would be helpful is there's an increasing understanding of the role of trees in urban areas and how it brings down your urban temperatures and water absorption and all that. And I think people are finally coming back around to wanting to see more.
Do you want more language related to the purpose of this?
Well, I think in terms of context, it might be helpful.
Okay.
Certainly in the adopting ordinance.
I mean, I have more trees probably than anybody downtown. I've got a whole ravine full of them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to play it out because there is a life cycle of a tree too. Trees don't last forever.
Yeah.
Is an engineer able to be one of the qualified professionals for tree retention plans?
Not currently. It's a
Okay.
arborist, forester, or landscape architect.
Yeah. That was a big pushback, I know, when others have looked at it. Okay.
Okay. So the fireworks stand, this one's really easy. We think there's a little bit of a loophole in our code. We're not sure what the intent was, but the fireworks code in Chapter 5, which our department has never administered until this year, it was handed off to us. They're supposed to check the zoning to make sure that the use is allowed. Our zoning table doesn't address fireworks stands at all, other than under the category of retail sales, which tells us that fireworks stands are only permitted in the commercial zone. In the past, however, we've issued permits to churches to have fireworks stands in their lots. Those are zoned residential, and so there's a potential incompatibility with our zoning code in terms of allowing fireworks stands in residential areas. What we're choosing to do, because we're updating our zoning code, and we'll address this going forward, but we're going to call a fireworks stand as a customary accessory use to a church. It's like a bake sale or anything else where churches do fundraisers. And we're going to issue the regular fireworks permit because we see it as an accessory use per the zoning table. In the future, we need to address fireworks stands in the zoning table and decide whether we allow them anywhere but commercial areas within the city. And so, do we want to allow somebody to set up shop anywhere, or is
Or
it
nowhere.
or nowhere?
Yeah, once they're banned, why would they need to sell them?
Takes 4 council members.
Yeah, my last time votes were counted, we still allow fireworks in it, so I'm operating under that assumption.
All right, public art.
So I got one sidebar to this from a code enforcement. So
Sidebar to
fireworks. I
Fireworks.
noticed when I was in Fred Meyer this weekend that they're selling them in
Yeah.
the store.
In the store.
And I don't know that our code would allow that.
I don't know what kind of fireworks.
well, you can find poppets just about
Poppets.
year
Yeah,
round.
you can find those anywhere.
There was a package of.
I think that package may be under a threshold in state law
Okay,
definition.
all right, I
I think typically the thing you see at Costco and at
Okay.
Fred Meyer is not the same as what.
So are they legal to discharge by code?
I don't know.
It seems early.
It just seems weird that we can sell things that can't be discharged.
Yeah. Those are the boring fireworks anyway.
Yeah. All right.
We only allow
Move on.
So painting cabinets in the city.
Yes.
We had a request from a citizen who wants to
I don't know that they're paintings. They're
painting or wrapping
They're
them
wraps.
with artwork.
decoration.
When you say
Initially,
wraps, is that a
Like a-
commercial wrap?
Like you've seen, the bus gets wrapped.
Yeah.
With a
Vinyl.
vinyl wrap.
Okay.
You see them on cars.
How does the
Bremerton's doing them.
damage
They look
per-
nice.
And they're all wraps?
Yeah, I believe so.
Huh, okay.
There might be
I can show you
some
an
are
example.
painted.
She sent one. In any event, she initially contacted us wanting to paint our utility vaults, and I assumed she was talking about our PSE transformers and things. And so I said, well, those are PSE, you need to talk to them. And then, let's see here, she sent me an article. Then she said, no, I think they're the traffic signal boxes. And I said, oh, okay, do you have a specific location in mind? I think most of ours are WashDOT rather than city. So let's see here. Yeah, so they're wrapping box, and these are traffic signal control boxes. I don't know if there's other.
Bremerton's are a little more subdued than that.
Well, so
A
like,
lot more subdued.
I think.
so if my daughter would love to paint one of these, but she can't because it's a wrap, right?
I don't believe they're painted. It's a wrap.
Yeah, if it's a wrap, I think you can design it and you can draw what goes on the box and have it created, using
Maybe
that.
they're wrapped
printer.
because you can clean graffiti off of them.
Yeah,
Well,
And
maybe it's a wrap
it's
that-
slick and it's easier to maintain too.
Is it a wrap that you put on and then paint?
No.
No,
okay.
it's
You're
It's
designing
like a
it
sticker.
computer
Yeah, it's like a
generated,
sticker,
so you would
okay.
draw it on a piece of paper,
So-
give it to the wrap company. and
So
all
I
that.
just see that limits involvement.
From my
when you
count-
dress those up.
we have 4, maybe 5 of these that are city-owned signal boxes because the Tremont ones are going away. Everything on Bay Street is WashDOT and presumably requires WashDOT approval, and so we need to check with
But
WashDOT.
Bremerton's even doing them on the smaller telecom boxes.
Well, and she hasn't shown me a location where there's a box other than she
Okay.
sent me 10 locations, and 6 out of 10 I think were WashDOT boxes.
Can we look at what Bremerton's doing and Bremerton's ordinance? Because I think they're doing a pretty good job at this.
Yeah,
I like it. I just want to make.
I think the
people
bigger
post
question is council in favor of having artwork on boxes?
Yeah.
And if they are, we will proceed with figuring out how to make it happen, and whether that's working with WashDOT or other partners. But I think is there a level of interest in doing this? So maybe we report that to the full council on a week from Tuesday, and if everybody is on board, I don't think action is needed. I think it's just a
It could require something in our code, I'll bet.
maybe.
Take a look at what Bremerton did.
Okay.
But yeah, I like it. Part of your staff report.
Okay,
It's a good idea.
Great.
all right, that's all.
You got my message that I'll be out
Yeah,
that week.
and so I'll make part of my mayor's report. You guys are down to one more. Beck's out of town on vacation too,
Okay.
and so you guys are going to have 4 of you. One more in
On the 12th?
26.
Or that
4?
week.
Did there not be anything controversial?
I'll try not
Which
to.
3 council members are going to be there?
Or not going to be there.
Oh no, 2. You're down 2.
So it's 5.
You're down to 5.
Yeah.
And then I'm gone too. So one of you is, he's the mayor pro tem. You're going to have to vote yourselves a mayor pro tem for
Temporary
the
pro tem.
evening.
Yeah. Pro temp.
Pro tem, pro tem. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I've got 11 minutes before my next meeting here.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.